Hello there. So this video highlights a low angle aerial coverage predominantly of the Palisadoes Spit from Norman Manley International Airport to Port Royal. Now, after I would have gone through this video, it has raised a lot of questions in my head. I went through a geotechnical report of Norman Manley International Airport, and as would have been highlighted in a 2008 report, black sand as a layer was found. In addition to that, what it is that grabs my attention is the orientation of Port Royal in of itself. And it then led me to do some digging as regards to the real potential of, the vast extent that the 1692 earthquake could have posed. I mean, this is a question, if Port Royal is located just a mere 2 or 3 kilometers from the Braeton Hill, and sections of Port Royal sunk. What happened over Braeton Hill? And then it also leads me to question, based on the river orientation that I would have observed that comes through Angels, I see where it makes an abrupt shifting, and the shifting orients itself to how Port Royal is associated, in addition to other landform features that I would have observed. Is this as a result of the now reactivated South Coast fault zone? So this is now where I go into the discussion of this video, step by step by step. First, let me talk about the black sands. Now, what you're looking at here is a clip of the 2013 Ecological Assessment Report provided for the Norman Manley International Airport. And in this report, what it is that it highlights is the borehole testing that was done. And it was a borehole testing that went down to the depths of approximately 15.69 meters. Now, in geological terms, we call that the Holocene, or it's a part of the Quaternary. Now, what this means is that, relatively speaking, it is a young strata column. And essentially, it's a case where these layers, which include the black sand, in terms of how I interpret it, would have more than likely been deposited within the last, let's just say, 10,000 to 1 million years. But having said this, I am not of the view that this 15.69 meter thick sedimentation or stratigraphic column is so old. If we're going to use what this Google AI highlights, 0.5 to 1.5 millimeters per year is what it takes to make peat. As the the Geotech report indicates, a trace of peat is identified with the black sand and some layers of, or some elements of, carbonate shells. What the report did not specify is at what, let's just say, vertical succession we will come across this layer of peat. So whether or not you're going to come across a layer of peat every 10 centimeters or so. Now, if I'm just going to just use some hypothetical, let's just say that we come across a layer of peat at 1 millimeter to 2 millimeters every 10 centimeters of the borehole. So essentially, let's just say then now that we're going to have us covering 10 layers or 10 millimeters of peat over that 1 meter. Then essentially that is indicating that this is a 10-year period. And if we're then now going to multiply that by, let's just say, the 10 meters of overall borehole, then this is going to indicate that, let's just say, it is a 100-year period for the peat to have formed in its trace amounts over the length. Essentially, where I'm going is that, this is then now potentially leading us into the reality that the peat formation could have been after the 1692 earthquake. As well, it could have been a case where it can give us some indication as to, what would have been the nature of the sediment change especially let's just say even after the 1907 earthquake. So that for me is also another interesting insight that these boreholes could provide. But since we don't have that data or access to that information, we'll just leave that as it is. Now, in terms of the areas that I would have uh, at least observed black sand. So, with it being that it is mentioned that black sand exists where the Norman Manley International Airport is and more likely extends itself to Port Royal, then we can also highlight that I would have covered black sand being present in the Albion region. And then we can also highlight that black sand I covered that in terms of my observation back in second year field geology uh, along the coastline. And then I would have also covered black sand, observed it in the Treasure Beach. And I actually have a video of this on YouTube as well. Now, with that being highlighted, what it is now that I can actually do is that I can basically plot now the overall extent, the spatial extent which black sand is more than likely present. And this now obviously indicates, as I would have mentioned again in another video, that potentially, Jamaica does have good, I would say, quantities to explore in terms of black sand off the coastline. So specifically in this area, the southern coast. Now, here is where things grow interesting. All of this area where black sand is located, it basically is also the area where the southern coast fault zone exists. So, with this being said, here's the first question. Could it be that the southern coast fault zone is structurally the feature that aligns the sedimentation or the deposition of black sand along the south coast of Jamaica? Second, could it be that the reactivation of the south coast fault zone could have occurred within a 300-year period relative to today? So, in essence, could it be that the south coast fault zone had its reactivation as a result of the 1692 earthquake or the 1907 earthquake? The way how we'll be able to find this out, one way that is through borehole testing along the extent of the south coast and potentially what it is that we could find in terms of where the black sands are located, whether or not we find the peat and other related layers. It could give us some indicators to be able to have some concrete answers in this area as one. But what it is now I want to highlight to you is that the orientation of the Palisadoes aligns itself with the extent of the south coast fault zone. We can see this orientation partially through the Hellshire Hills, which then goes into the Brasiletto Mountains in Clarendon, through Alligator Pond, Treasure Beach. Now look at this image. Focus on Port Royal and to the left of Port Royal, where that's the hill of Braeton Hill. I have that red mark around Port Royal to give a visual of the extent, approximate extent of Port Royal that is currently underwater. Now, as I would have been going through this Google Photos or Google Terrain map for the purpose of this video, it caught my eye that over Braeton Hill, there is that flat area that is somewhat in a similar trend of the Port Royal Spit. Now, if Braeton Hill is a hill, to have that flat as it is indicates to me that there more than likely would have been a degree of mass movement or landslide. what would have been the result, or what would have been the causative force for that landslide? Could it have been that it was the same kind of force that resulted in the sinking of Port Royal? Similarly, look at the water flow that is coming from the section of Spanish Town there. You will notice that it starts by having a trend of, let's just say, north northwest or southeast. But as it exits Spanish Town and enters into, let's just say, the zone of Central Village, it makes an abrupt turn to the right or to the east. And then, after some kilometers, it makes its way back down to the south, where it will then exit somewhat into the Kingston region there. Why is that the case? Could it be that the South Coast Fault Zone is a key factor behind that sharp shifting, even though there are other north-south trend faults? Could it be that the shifting of the watercourse is a relatively new feature? In other words, could it be that this shifting took place as a result of a major tectonic activity that would have been relatively in recent times, geologically speaking, and as such could be associated with the South Coast Fault Zone? These questions, in my view, are questions that we as a country should be focused on putting resources to try and answer, to be in a better position, because essentially there is so much that the landscape is showing us in terms of cues, in terms of things we need to be researching, and we are not doing enough. This is a clip of Port Royal, just highlighting to you the nature, the flatness of the area. Look at the extent at which Port Royal exists today. There is Portmore, sections of Portmore. Notice that area, that flat area that basically I would have spoken about earlier. Notice now also that outlet of the river there, that pretty much would have been the same river that came from sections of Spanish Town, I believe, the Rio Cobre, that outlets into Kingston. There we can see the extent of the population within the zone, which more than likely is a zone that potentially is within the range of the South Coast Fault Zone. Jamaica, we have work to do.